welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and I am joined by a comics creator who has gifted us with a book that really shaped the dreams that I had last night when I was rereading it for this interview. It is so scary, so disturbing, but also so beautiful, and I am so excited to talk about it. So welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Yeah, thank you so much for such a warm welcome. My name is Beth Hetland, and I'm the cartoonist for the book Tender that's out with Fantagraphics.
It is just a gorgeous art object in and of itself. Like it's classic, like Fantagraphics, classy production and, like really gorgeous aesthetics. And
Thank you.
you're welcome. And your art is so beautiful and disturbing. But before we get into the book itself too much, could you talk a little bit about your journey to comics and how this project came about?
Yeah, definitely. So, I think it's a fairly common tale of cartoonists or creators being like, well, I was one of those kids who was like scribbling away on the back of envelopes and scrap paper. I started reading comics as like Sunday strips, and really fell in love with like the like dorky pun humor. Really loved Foxtrot. Shout out to uh, my favorite strip. And then when I ended up going to undergrad at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, which is where I now teach. And during that program, I went thinking I was going to do animation. And so my first 2 years when I was there, I was like hand animating, puppet animating, and I like the process of it, but ended up being really frustrated with how much story you could tell, and like it felt like you're and not to say that comics is that much faster, but in comparison of like the amount of drawings or the amount of work you're doing to get like a very small motion versus the amount of drawing and the amount of work you're doing to get an entire story I can hand to somebody. So I ended up taking a class that really opened my horizons to like graphic novels and comic book as a form. And so I started doing like print work, so like screen printing, got really into like zine making and artist books. And then it kind of like shot off from there. So finished my undergrad. I went immediately to grad school at the Center for Cartoon Studies, where you eat, sleep, breathe comics in a very tiny town in Vermont. And it was even though, a lot of people say take time off before you go to grad school, for me, it was the absolute right choice to just like jump on the momentum that I had at the end of undergrad and just like barrel through. And yeah, I've been self-publishing for the majority of my career, about almost 20 years now. And then I work with a collaborator a lot of the time. And so I'll alternate kind of like solo projects and then collaborative projects. But that kind of takes us to where we're at with the book being out now.
Mm. Do you feel like when you collaborate versus when you write solo, does your work have a different tone or feel to it? Like what does working with somebody else bring to your work?
Yeah, I think it offers a lot of really great opportunities to like draw thing like typically in the collaboration, I'm the drawer, I guess I should clarify. And my collaborative partner's name is Kyle O'Connell. And when we're collaborating together, we both talk about the kind of project we want to do. And so I think it absolutely shifts based on, there's two people's perspectives that want to have work created about it, but then there's a lot of things that I feel like I wouldn't like write for myself to draw that I think show up in collaboration, which is a great challenge. And then the way that he and I collaborate is very fluid, especially in the writing or the editing process, is that Kyle can draw and I can write. It's just that we're faster at the opposite than each other. And so he will give drawing feedback, I'll give writing feedback. It ends up being this really mushy, like really genuinely 50% like co-owner of the creation. Yeah.
That's very cool. And yeah, I want to ask about teaching too, because as somebody who spent like way too much time in grad school and was also teaching at the same time, I am like very fond of practitioners who also teach. Do you feel like
Yeah.
teaching has influenced your work or your approach to your work at all?
Oh my gosh, massively. I think Tender is actually a really good example of me, like the way that teaching has impacted my own practice is that, since I've been teaching since 2011, and the school that I teach at doesn't have a comics program, and so the type of work that students are making can be fairly traditional comics, but oftentimes is extremely experimental, like installation work, like fibers work, like sculptural performance. And then we're using comics as the language, or they're identifying it as comics. And so there's that element of my practice that isn't really as public, as I have like experimental mini comics that are like, I don't sell them, I just make them because I want to, but they're like fabric based, they're sewn, they're um using embroidery. Yeah, there's a variety of things there that's more of like my more private art practice. And then Tender itself, a lot of my students, like the majority of my students, are working digitally these days. And I really felt like, I'm capable of using digital technology, but I wasn't drawing fully on my iPad. I was using like paper and then bringing it in digitally to do cleanup or color or corrections and things. And I just felt like I can't justify being a teacher who is really invested in my students' work. And if they need help troubleshooting something, like I can't be that person that's like, I don't know, look it up. I just feel like that's not my MO as like a teacher. And so I got an iPad and started like forcing myself to draw with it. And Tender itself is actually drawn entirely on my iPad. And it started as a way to be able to become fluid and fluent in that process. And it turns out I really like it a lot. And I think I feel like a fool for not having done it sooner, but I think it's a really great tool. And like now there's a really nice relationship that I have with students who are working digitally, that where I can say, actually there's a faster way to do this, or oh, how did you do that? Can you show me? Like there's like a really nice like exchange of knowledge happening that I think is something I strive for in the classroom of these are colleagues. These are colleagues of mine. These are not they're college students, right? Like they're adults, they're colleagues, they're about to be in the field, and I think that kind of like mutual skill share is really valuable.
Hmm. Yeah, I really love that. I love that yeah, teaching creates a community and also like a laboratory for you to try new things and really like test your skill set, which is super awesome. Hmm.
Yeah.
So let's get to Tender. Let's start out by talking a little bit about Carol Ann, shaping her as a character,
Mhm.
and then also maybe how I've never asked this before, so let me see if I can like articulate it. How working with like a character's personality or traits or behaviors, how does that like influence physical design for you?
Yeah. So great question. Carol Ann is somebody who I went in thinking she needs to just she like I want to be clear, she's a character and she's lines on a page. Like she's just meant to be kind of plain. Like she's like I wanted her as like both a design and as like the things that she does before, like just like in her general life, like what her job is and these other elements, like to just kind of be blah and like no normal, for lack of a better term, like just sort of blending in with the crowd. Like she doesn't have many particular like interests. Like she goes to brunch with the girls, she has a couple of friends. Her like physical demeanor, like her body is like she has a little bit of weight on her, but she's not super duper like comic book woman design. Like she doesn't have a large bust and hips and a super tiny waist that bends around backwards somehow. She just kind of looks like an average person. And that was really important to me, is that I wanted her to feel like she could be anybody. And that's kind of the vision for both her design and for kind of her personality, or at least until we get into what she's really like, in which case she's not just anybody.
That makes total sense. Yeah, she like presents as like just very like statistically average, like
Yeah, I mean, I think she squarely, like, the clothes she wears, she doesn't really wear stuff with like logos on it. She's like got kind of like generic business casual outfits. She likes to wear like leggings and a baggy t-shirt to bed. Like these are just things that I'm like, these are things that like I do, these are things I see around me. And these are things where I'm not like, wow, look at that person's fashion. Like, that's not Carol Ann. Carol Ann's the person you're like, I didn't even see them there.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about how you use Carol Ann and her relationships and her life journey, let's call it, to talk about the impact of social media on like
Yeah.
a life as opposed to like on society. Um,
Yeah.
I'm super fascinated with like, how you engage with how much social media like requires us to self-curate and to
Mm.
present ourselves in a certain way. So could you, yeah, talk about how you engage with social media and how it affects Carol Ann like as a person?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and like I'm just as susceptible and as guilty of this, of, not only like having feelings of jealousy, having feelings of like envy, but also having feelings of like, oh, I can't wait to share this like online. And I think, so much of that is rooted in the way that those programs are designed to give you this like addictive feeling, or this kind of like dopamine hit, or under the guise of like community, under the guise of like genuine interactions. And not to say that people can't have genuine interactions. Of course they can. But the way that it impacts Carol Ann in particular is that she is an extremely passive participant, is that she is constantly on her phone, on social media, scrolling, 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 and just seeing um, positive things, benchmark moments, particularly ones that are heteronormative and like through the lens of a single woman looking at them, and a single woman who feels like she is trying to measure herself next to people. And so there's a lot of feelings of like the algorithm, feeds you things that have like people's faces, like selfies will show up a lot more than other things, like new events, so like wedding, birthdays, baby announcements, like things like that are feed the algorithm to be at the top. And Carol Ann is maybe not as aware, or is not able to kind of resist the siren song of thinking that these are genuine or real, or and again, this is kind of a broad statement. It's not that these events aren't real. It's that to her, she thinks everyone is perfect. Everyone is like hitting their benchmarks when they're supposed to. That social media is making the roadmap that she's supposed to follow. And when things don't go that way is where the tension of the story shows up, I think.
Yeah, we like there is this sort of real paradox at the heart of like a lot of people's, including mine at various points in my life, the way that you use social media, because it can provide that dopamine hit, as you said, but it can also make you feel really bad. And so like become
Yes.
emotionally dependent on something that makes you feel bad all the time is, yeah, it's a real bad recipe. So,
Yeah, and I think with anything, there's the goal of it in moderation, right? Like I think that doesn't mean that I hope that my book is not saying, don't post this
no.
stuff. You're gonna wreck someone's life. Like that's not what I'm trying to say. I also don't think like you should participate in it if it feels good to you. Like absolutely. And also like there is more than just the social media aspect that is manipulating Carol Ann's vision, and like that has impacted her. There are all these instances of what society at large is implying or the messaging that is being said. And I think her friend group is my example of this, is that her friend, she has like five, six friends, and they all are, they're fine, but they're just kind of banal, and like they notice when things are starting to not go so well for Carol Ann, but ultimately they're not really able to do anything about it. One of the friends like speaks exclusively in like rom-com platitudes. And like to me, like, yes, we relate to each other through media, and also like this is like again a curated thing that's written. Like that's not how people interact all the time. So yeah, there's a lot of other factors kind of crushing in on Carol Ann and like forming her perception in addition to social media, which I think is one of the more like blatant or obvious ways of seeing that kind of like painful relationship.
Yeah. Gosh, yeah, it's very effective to sort of, I'm not going to reveal anything. I will let you talk about whatever details you want to you want to share with
Sure.
us. But to watch her sort of, her emotional descent into depression and a lot of anxiety and sort of self-judgment. Um,
Hmm.
I'd love to talk about how you show that journey, and how you use like time and structure in the book, because the story isn't always presented chronologically. Uh,
Yeah.
could you talk about that decision and maybe how like you use that to express like her journey?
Yeah, I think for me, because this book fits squarely to me in like psychological thriller, I wanted there to be an element of unease for the reader themselves. And so part of my goal with the narrative structure is to jump through time in a different order so that we're getting kind of this, as a reader, we're getting this like emotional whiplash of like moments that are really amazing in Carol Ann's life, and then immediately the next section is something devastating. And I wanted that in the same way that like our perception of time is skewed when we're experiencing like a wide range of emotions, especially extreme emotions. And I also wanted it to have kind of like a slow creep of what was happening, because the most intense or the most like visceral moments of the book are at the end. And I wanted you as a reader to kind of be slowly drawn into this, and that I had somebody mentioned at one point that if you flipped through this book and landed on all the wrong pages, you would just think it's a romance because of the way that it's organized. And I wanted to do that on purpose to kind of like lull you into a sense of security while feeling some elements of unease, which is also why there are these dream sequences kind of peppered in to kind of remind you like, hey, this is a horror book. Like, this is going to get spooky. Like, just remember her internal space is totally different than what we're seeing in her external space. And so there's like the overall kind of like whiplash of like the emotional journey for us as well as for her, and then the slow creep. And then I also wanted to like show, there's a page early on, and I don't feel like this is spoiling anything, but there's a page early on where the panels like shrink down teeny tiny to show this like repetitive, mundane set of tasks that Carol Ann is doing day in and day out. And I also wanted to show that like this thing that she kind of thought she wanted um, actually is maybe not that fulfilling for her. And there's still some kind of hole there. There's still some kind of gap that's not there because, again, she's kind of comparing herself to these like facades of perfection or facades of what this looks like. And the actuality of doing this is maybe quite a bit more just humdrum and not like mentally stimulating for her.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really effective because I think like by presenting it in that slow burn way, like you kind of unconsciously get on board like with her thinking that like, oh, when she achieves this thing, like everything's gonna be great. And
Yeah,
and we all kind of think about our lives magically that way sometimes, like, oh, if I were to be able to achieve like this thing, all my problems would be solved and I would be happy. And the end. Um,
right.
And we all experience at some point like oh, yeah, there is no magic fix. Like even if the thing you want happens, there will be further conflict or, troubles in your life, etc. And
Yeah.
how that comes up against like the urge we have to self-curate, and only present ourselves at like our highest and best and most successful moments.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think that that's like such a big part of like existing, but it's also a big part of trying to get that in the book. And I'm really happy to hear you're almost on board with this. Is like it is kind of a unsettling magic trick that I'm pulling to get you, because also like I don't know, I can't have a character who is going through this that you just spend the whole time hating. Like I feel like there, to me, one of the challenges is writing her in a way that allows for space for that empathy and relatability to say like, or compassion, however you want to look at it, to be like, wow, this like I can understand how she's getting from point A to point B, even if like I would never do that. Or like, oh no, don't do that.
So I would love to talk about like again to whatever degree like you want to share details, the body horror aspects. I
Yeah.
think oh gosh, yeah, like you achieve that thing every once in a while when like you just see something and you feel that like yeah, the sympathy chill of like oh, feeling that would be awful, So, like what was your approach to depicting body horror and also to not depicting it, because there are things you
Mhm.
choose to show and things you choose not to show. Mm.
Yeah, certainly. I think that that sympathy chill, I love the phrase of that. I've not heard someone articulate it that way yet, and I love it. I I really feel that a lot in media, and so one of the like guiding lights for me was like, what are the things that like yuck me out? And so I'm kind of using myself as like a test audience for this a little bit. I am most certainly like pretty desensitized to what is actually in the book now because of how much time I've spent with it. So, that's very different. But as far as like the things I chose to show versus the things I didn't, is really I really wanted to avoid a common pitfall, I think, in body horror, which is that if there's a female protagonist, the body horror is going to be related to menstruation or birth or, sexual abuse in some way. And I was like, I am not interested in that. I'm not interested in depicting a traumatic event in a way that is overly grotesque. I don't want that. I also am not interested in depicting something that is completely normal for a body to do in a way that is overly grotesque. And so those were kind of my two, like, scooch it out. And I also wanted it to feel like, I don't know, the things that she does or the things that show up in the book are like one of the early ones again that I don't feel like is much of a spoiler is there's like cuticle picking that goes way farther than it ever should. And like in everyone knows what that feeling is of having a hangnail. And like that's really uncomfortable. It's a super sensitive area. Like fingers, eyeballs, ears are like top no-no zones for a lot of people. And also fingers, eyeballs, ears are things that any body can have. And I think that that is an important part of this is that, the body, I'm thinking about the body and the way that it turns horrific or monstrous is not necessarily because of how it was designed or whatever. It has to do with like external intervention. And that external intervention is of her. Like she's the one who's committing these things to herself, which is pretty upsetting and pretty horrific. And I think it also is like a control, it's like agency. I think it, it has like relationships to like self-harm. I think similarly it has relationships to like disordered eating within this, as well as like pica as like a thing that happens where you crave objects that are not meant to be ingested. And specifically a lot of like pregnant women have that or go through a period of that time. So yeah, I feel like I'm getting off the rails slightly, but that's kind of my like scope of that.
That's fascinating. Yeah, and like the cuticle is like the kind of perfect, I think, microcosm of like how you manage to achieve like the sympathy chill, because like as you said, we've all experienced it and it is really sensitive, but we've also all experienced to some degree like the compulsion to pick it, like because
Hmm.
sometimes you're looking at it, you're like, that's gonna hurt, but like I just can't keep looking at it. So like here we go. So,
Yeah, or like tonguing a spot in your mouth that's like been burned or something, or like a sensitive gum or whatever is like, yeah, that compulsion, that urge to like keep trying to exert control over this thing that's like its own organism, like your body, I'm gesturing to. But like there's something about it where your brain is like, just take care of it, just do it now. And you're like, but I shouldn't. And then you're like, I did it. Oh no, I regret it. Like there's like that element of that back and forth, I think, of that internal tension.
absolutely. Well, gosh, this has been fascinating, and I love this book so much. What is next for you? Are there any more comics on your horizon at the moment?
Oh yes, there's so many comics all the time. I'm right now just working on a two-page one that is for Bubbles magazine. That's going to be out, I think, in December. And then there's a couple of projects that Kyle and I had on the back burner, or had to put on the back burner for when the release for Tender came out, because I've been like extreme marketing mode since the book came out. I've got like 65 events since March. So it's been a real adventure for that. But so we're gonna be picking that stuff back up. And then there's little like whispers of something in my brain that is maybe trying to crawl out, but I don't know if I'm ready to like put it into words yet. Right now it just lives in my own nightmares and sketchbook.
That's awesome. I'm so glad to hear it. And yeah, I will happily, read whatever comes next. So yeah, thank you for coming and talking about this project with us.
Thank you so much for having me. What a treat, and some great questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, listeners, it's now on you. Please check out Tender. It is, yeah, really disturbing, but really beautiful. And it's just like it's a must read, I think, for this year. By the time you hear this, it's going to be December. We're thinking about the holidays. If you want to give someone a really dark present, this would be perfect.
Perfect for a paramour of anyone. No.
Yes, yeah. If you've just started dating someone and you want to make it real weird, real fast. Okay, thank you, everyone. It is now time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.